I'll keep it very short considering our time limit. So I'm going to start kind of in alpha order, and I'll start with Jay Garner. He is president and founder of Garner Economics. This is an economic development and site location consulting firm headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Jay is a leader and an innovator in the economic profession, having served for 40 years as both an award-winning economic developer, Chamber of Commerce CEO, and site selection professional. He is a founding member and current chairman of the board for Site Selectors Guild. So happy to have you with us, Jay. And now move on to Larry Gigerich. He is founder and executive managing director of Ginovus. Lloyd is a nationally recognized economic development leader with more than 30 years of local and state government experience, including not-for-profit and private sector experience. He was named by Governing Magazine as one of the nation's best economic development officials, and Larry is a member also of the Site Selectors Guild as well. Prior to founding Ginovus in 2002, Larry worked in a variety of economic development settings, including Deputy Director of Business Development for the Indiana Department of Commerce, Senior Advisor to the Mayor of the City of Indianapolis for Economic and Workforce Development, and as well as President and CEO of the Indianapolis Economic Development Corporation. And then last, and certainly not least, is Chris Lloyd. Chris leads the McGuireWoods Consulting Infrastructure and Economic Development team, where he specializes in site selection and economic development incentives negotiations. Prior to joining McGuireWoods Consulting, Chris served for nearly 5 years in the Office of the Secretary of Commerce and Trade under Virginia Governors Allen and Wilder. In this position, he was responsible for legislative, budgetary, and regulatory coordination and development within the Secretariat, which also includes economic development incentive programs. So as you can see, our panelists have a great deal of experience, a lot of breadth here. And so I say we jump right into starting to talk about food. So this year has undoubtedly been one of the most disruptive on record, with global supply chains being stretched and uncertainty across all the markets. It has also seen some businesses absolutely strengthen. Think of grocery stores and the uptick that they experienced, especially in the last months as we've all started to cook from home. So as you're speaking to a group of economic development professionals, inquiring minds want to know. So my first question is, in your opinion, and this is kind of broad, what are the latest trends in food processing related site selection, and how is COVID-19 affecting these trends? Who would like to go first?
Well, I'm happy to.
Well, Mary Beth, I can. Okay. Well, I'll just start briefly and just say, certainly COVID has had an impact without a doubt on food industry and the site selection process. I mean, if you think about it, we're about 8 months into this global pandemic, and, it certainly has not only increased the pace of e-commerce activity, but people who weren't necessarily early adopters of using groceries as an example, buying groceries. My parents in the early 70s never did that online, had delivered to their house. Well, now they're never going to change and go back. So you have that piece, but then you also have the issue of how you serve different markets and get that assistance there, or get those products there. So I'll point to a couple stats, and then I'll turn it over to Jay. As you look at it, we've seen Walmart's e-commerce division heavily driven in the last 6 months by groceries in particular, household goods, grow 97% year over year. And with this rapid adoption we've seen, it's also changing some of the supply chain factors of where you make the product and how you distribute it. And Amazon, obviously, that's been growing, as we all know, like crazy. They've experienced a 42% increase in sales, again, mostly driven by household goods since COVID started. So it's having an impact in particular on supply chain.
Jay, is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, I think, aspects of this that I believe our audience is most concerned about. So what are, some of the hot product trends? Well, what has really taken off, which was down significantly before the pandemic, are alcohol-infused drinks. So alcohol consumption has grown exponentially during the pandemic, and then that has caused a number of beverage type of manufacturers to expand their process. So like hard seltzers hard lemonade. There was an announcement in South Carolina recently about a new manufacturer that is making that White Claw seltzer, as an example, a huge project. So those are significant. Sugar drinks continue to be way down. And so some of the companies that have had sugar lines are being modified to allow for alcohol-related lines. As it relates to product itself, protein is huge. People have asked me plenty of times, do you think that we will see smaller footprints for protein facilities? And the answer is no, you won't, because if you do that, you have to modify the conveyor systems and all of the equipment, and it's very expensive to do. So instead, what you're going to see, companies like the Tysons and the Hatfields and companies like that, the Smithfields, will all modify their production for allow for physical distancing until the vaccine comes along, but you're not going to see a smaller footprint. It's just not cost effective to do that. Lastly, virtual. Will virtual ever take the place of doing on-site visits? Absolutely not. Virtual will compress the timing and make it less expensive, but at the end of the day, you still have to kick the dirt. I was working a project in Texas. As soon as Governor Abbott allowed for travel from Atlanta to Texas in June the 12th, I was on a plane June 17th. And I've been traveling almost constantly since then. So you still have to kick the dirt.
That makes sense. Grace, what are you thinking?
Sure, I'll add a couple of things. First, Mary Beth, thanks to you and SCDC for hosting us. We really appreciate this opportunity. And I think it's you started off with this, Mary Beth. It's no shock to everybody that food is on everybody's mind. I remember as the crisis was unfolding, my son and I, we were in Salt Lake City skiing, and we had to go to the grocery store. I think this is the night of the 11th of March, just as everything was starting to unravel. And the guy next to us in line turned to his wife and said, "Hey, go back to the back of the store and get a lot of those ho-hos because I need that to get through the next 2 weeks of lockdown." Here we are 8 months later. I hope that guy hadn't run out of ho-hos yet, but because obviously he would be in a world of hurt. But two other trends that I would add to what Jay and Larry added were, one, and it builds a little bit on what Jay talked about the smaller footprints. I think he's absolutely right. But what I'm also seeing among our client base is not only are people spreading out larger, having more physical distancing, particularly in the protein space, but an acceleration of a trend which was already happening, and that is increased automation in their factories. Is because in some places you just can't get people, you can't spread people out but so much. So what the COVID crisis has done is just accelerated the trend that was already in place before COVID to automate a lot of these processes, particularly the much more hazardous ones. So people are rushing product to market in order to automate a lot of processes within food processing. And so that's obviously good from an investment perspective and a tax perspective, but obviously it's going to reduce the number of jobs that are in some of these facilities. The second is there's a lot of shifting going on within the food space right now, that there were many plants that were set up for institutional customers. So conventions, large food service activities, hotels. We had several of our clients literally would shut down for a week in April and May and completely redid their entire processing and packaging operation to shift it to ready to eat for consumer. Because as Larry and Jay both noted, we're buying more at the grocery store now instead of going out to eat. There's obviously not any conventions happening, as we know from doing this virtually. So the food service companies, the food processors and all that were set up to deal with that market have had to shift towards putting their packages or their product in smaller packages. So that's also bringing out some changes on the factory floor itself as well. Thanks.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of along those lines, are you seeing, so the retooling is happening, are you seeing the retooling also playing out in the rethinking of companies' future plans? I mean, are your clients shifting their mindset about how they're going to go about doing the site selection process and what they're thinking of doing and how they're thinking of automating?
Jay, you're on mute.
Yes.
Sorry. I think on some of that, it depends on the type of project, Mary Beth. So, let's say it's a protein facility that would be a harvesting facility. There's not much you can do in automation at all. Whereas on what we call further processed foods, there's a lot you can do in automation. So as a result of that, you're going to see some re-engineering of space, because there were hot spots. During the month of May, protein facilities, 40% of the U.S. protein facilities were shut down. That's why we had meat shortages in the U.S. So, like the two words you can always depend on in economic development, it depends, and it just depends on the project. Larry?
Yeah, and I would just add to what Jay said that he made a very good point. Our virtual site search is going to replace how we've traditionally done it. And the answer is no. He's exactly right. I think more people are going to be comfortable, and we are moving in this direction. I think Chris and Jay would agree, where there was a lot more desktop review and work being done to compress the timelines before COVID. And some of those things will continue to evolve and move forward. But we're going to get back on the ground. I think especially when you look at manufacturing and logistics projects, maybe for some office projects, it's a little easier to do it virtually. But for the food industry, in particular manufacturing and logistics, we're going to get back on the ground, and that's the best way to approach this. And I think to Chris's point, we need to see how things evolve too. This switch that he noted, which is really important. Some companies supporting large commercial operations pivoting to serve customers. We don't know what the restaurant world, as an example, is going to look like 6 months from now, let alone 3 years from now. And some of those shifts may change, but I think we all anticipate when there's a vaccine available, we're going to see a return to things that are more normal like that.
Mary Beth, the only thing that I would add that I think we are going to start to see, or we already are starting to see, as it impacts projects and the nature of projects, one is, I think we're starting to see some diversification within the food and beverage world. Some of these alternative protein projects, some of these locally sourced, the hydroponic and indoor greenhousing. Whether that, because of the economic strain, can they survive? One, do they survive this crisis? Two, do people really care where their lettuce comes from after this? When they're more worried about just, are they going to, make sure that they avoid the flu or the coronavirus or whatever? I think there is going to be a role for those, but I think it's going to be a shakeout in that industry. And in fact, I think Beyond Meat, in fact, yesterday reported actually a bigger loss than expected. So, was how much that was, is that a temporary shift in consumer behavior away from that, which was exploding before this, or is it an aberration, or is it something long term? And then the second thing is, I think I'm already noticing it in the grocery store. I do most of our grocery shopping for the family. My wife hates grocery shopping. She does the cooking, though, thankfully. So, but I'm noticing a lot less variety in the store. So, whereas you might have had 10 different types of Italian dressing before, now you've only got 2. And so, you're seeing, does that roll through for the fewer projects, or just less variety within the walls of the projects you see now? So you see some doubling down in the very popular products, but, you may see some of those niche products disappear for some time.
No, that makes complete sense. And in our last 2 minutes together, I kind of wanted to throw out, so are your clients asking for anything these days around incentives or what they're needing from locations that they're looking for? It may be a shift from previous years.
I would say, just quickly from my perspective, Mary Beth, that I don't think necessarily seeing different things at this stage. I think what is really important, you can break this into two groups. People that already have incentives in place, and then ones that are looking at projects now. In situations where incentives are already in place, exercising flexibility as people have moved to remote working. Obviously, there's been an impact on companies trying to hit their goals in this 8-month COVID period we've been in. But I think going forward on new projects, which is probably more applicable to this conversation, it's going to be important to build in some flexibility as we move forward, because we don't know, again, how things are going to look 6 months from now, let alone 2, 3+ years from now. I mean, we all hope there's a vaccine early next year. We all can take advantage of if we want to do that. But there needs to be flexibility, because somebody right now is saying, hey, we think we're going to invest this amount of money, create this number of jobs over the next 2 to 3 years. There's a lot more uncertainty than ever before. So I think it's more about deal structuring, not necessarily.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Well, I think we are out of time, but I really appreciate all three of you. Thank you for your insights and for sharing what you've got going on. And I think we will be moving towards our smaller table discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.